You who were not here, probably you have to bear with me somehow. You remember the 2 points which so far we discussed. And for the soul to grow and to develop and to become closer to Baha'u'llah, for the spirit of faith, when we talked about the spirit of faith, to grow day by day, so that our faith becomes stronger day by day, stronger, so that Baha'u'llah's words become fulfilled when he expects of us that our tomorrow is better than our today. And we pointed out 1 or 2 points that we could help ourselves, and this was the way that Baha'u'llah himself had shown us. We talked about the saying of obligatory prayers, the significance of it. We said how much that the saying of the obligatory prayer makes the soul humble. Really, when you read it carefully and in the presence of God, in the privacy of your own chamber, you read that and you see how humble we become. We become like that drop which I was mentioning yesterday, seeing the ocean. And then great powers can descend on the soul. And then when we read the writings of Baha'u'llah, and we talked about what the writings consisted of, so different from prayers, then great powers again will come. But that's not enough. You know, the story of religion is the story of love. When you say you are a Baha'i, you means that we are in love with Baha'u'llah. This is the meaning of it. It's a love story. It's not a story of knowledge. Forget about knowledge. Knowledge is a problem, quite frankly. And we probably talk about this. I'll make sure that I'll talk about this sometime today to you. But love for God, love for Baha'u'llah. We are created to be the lovers. You know, this is the function of man, is to be a lover. And to the extent that we are a lover, to that extent we can enjoy life and we can enjoy living in accordance with the teachings. Now, to be a Baha'i means you are a lover of Baha'u'llah. And of course, loving is a relative term. It varies from person to person. We are at different levels here. When you love somebody, the sign of love, a real love, is that you are ready and willing and really longing to do what your beloved asks you to do. Isn't that right? This is a true love I'm talking about. I'm not talking of superficial love that we think somebody may think he has for somebody else. You know, the real love. When you have a real love, you don't want anything for yourself. You realize this? And if you ever want anything for yourself, it means that you are not in love with that person. Now, if you say, oh yes, I love this person because, oh, he's very rich and he's got cars and houses and business, I love him. This is not love, this is selfishness, you see. But a real love is when you don't want anything for yourself, that you want everything for your beloved. Now here we come to a very important point. When we become a Baha'i, and when we love Baha'u'llah, we want to do everything he has asked us to do, to carry out his teachings. And this is a very important point. If I say I love him but I don't carry out his teachings, then it means it's no use. I read the writings, what's the use of it? I say my prayers but I don't obey Baha'u'llah. You see how these things are related together? How one follows the other? You remember yesterday I was telling you it's something like you have to close all the switches which are in series, one after the other, and if one of them is open, no current can go through. You have to close all the switches. Now this is it. We have to be willing and ready and joyous and longing to carry out his teachings. And his teachings is not purely, and his laws, the laws that he has given to us. Now in the Western world, we don't have many laws. Our laws are very few that Baha'u'llah has now given to us. The time will come in the future that we have to carry out more laws, which he has enjoined upon us. But the laws that he has given to us are so few. I mean, I will count them for you. We can count it with the fingers of your hand. Do you know what the first law of Baha'u'llah is, which we are asked to carry out? The most important of these laws? It's a law. And law has precedence over anything else. If there is a law, and if there is a teaching or a saying, the preference comes to the law of Baha'u'llah. I mentioned yesterday, if there was a choice between reading the writings of Baha'u'llah and saying the obligatory prayers, we say the obligatory prayers because it's the law of Baha'u'llah. Now the first and the most important law of Baha'u'llah is the saying of obligatory prayers and fasting. It's required of us. And he mentions, Abdu'l-Bahá also mentions, that if we do not do that, we will not be able to get close to him. There is a barrier already. And we have to make this a habit. Let us, all of us here, as our chairman was saying, really determine and try it. I would suggest, and this is of course, I'm mentioning this to the new Baha'is, because the older Baha'is are familiar with this. But I'm mentioning this to newer Baha'is. Let us try this for 3 months. Do it regularly. And regularly read the writings, and then you forget about it. Just remember it for 3 months. That's enough. Then forget about it. All will work out then. You will find it becomes a beautiful picture. You try it. You try it and see how one's life will change. Now, yes, we must, just reading the laws of Baha'u'llah, I was talking about. The fasting, obligatory prayers, the law of marriage, Baha'i marriage, I'm sure you're all familiar with. The law of prohibition of the drinking of alcohol is one of the laws of Baha'u'llah, which is binding on us. It is time that now, in the Western world, we are able, as Baha'is, and especially the young Baha'is, to stand erect, well-oriented, strong people who will stand up in the public and say, I will not drink because Baha'u'llah has forbidden it. And the same thing applies to the taking of drugs. These are the things we have to be frank with people who become Baha'is and tell them this. They have every right to know this. And then it is, the other one is the question of sexual relations outside marriage. It's forbidden by Baha'u'llah. Outside marriage, before and after. Marriage, he has enjoined upon us. And it is not compulsory, but it's a marvelous thing. When I was about 10 or 12 years ago in Ireland, we had about 150, 200 people became Baha'is in one town. Young people, young men and young women. They became beautiful Baha'is, strong Baha'is. And they all scattered. We asked them to scatter throughout the country. And now they are the people who have built up the foundations of a new, of all the communities we have there. We have now in the south of Ireland 20 local assemblies. And these people have become the foundations of these assemblies. They have pioneered. They've all of them spread around. And they live recognizing our impotence and our utter nothingness and our humility. Then you have the makings of a spiritual giant.
Servitude, you see, is the greatest station that God has destined for man. There is no greater station than the station of servitude for man. In fact, there are 3 stations, he says, in the world. The station of God, which is above us, the station of the manifestations of God, which is above us, and the station of man is that of servitude. Servitude. And Abdu'l-Bahá was the true servant. No person on this earth will ever reach him as low as that in servitude. Because when you go in servitude, you go down, further down, not up. You cannot be a servant and have ambition to become somebody. There is no station for anybody in this faith. And this is a great protection for all of us. If you want to think of a station for somebody, servitude. To be low, to be... Abdu'l-Bahá says, make me a dust in the path of thy loved ones. This is true. A dust in the path of loved ones. If ever somebody thinks of saying I, this is a very bad word to use, I. Or my. It's really a bad word. It's the word which has caused all the troubles in the world. But utter nothingness come to us when we see the great ocean of revelation of Baha'u'llah. You cannot artificially become humble. And humility come only to us when we see the greatness of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Now Abdu'l-Bahá became that embodiment of servitude. And he himself begged Baha'u'llah to give him that station when he was a child. When Abdu'l-Bahá was a child of about 10 years of age in Baghdad, he had recognized the station of his father. And I mentioned that he recognized it, really recognized who he was. We haven't recognized him. We cannot recognize him. We can only recognize him to a limited degree. Abdu'l-Bahā's recognition and the recognition of the Bab as to the station of Baha'u'llah was so complete that it is beyond us. You know that often people think that because Abdu'l-Bahá was the son of Baha'u'llah, well, you know how it is between the father and the son. There is always an intimate relationship of intimacy and there is no conventions there. You know, at home when you're alone, you're just very, very relaxed and absolutely free, and there is no restrictions. You're a member of a family, and this is your father, and this is the son, and who knows what the sons these days do to their fathers, and vice versa. But anyhow, we have a very, very intimate relationship. And some people may think that Abdu'l-Bahá had the same relationship with his father. Well, he didn't. Although there was this love between them, naturally. But Abdu'l-Bahá had so recognized the station of Baha'u'llah as being the Lord of Lords, as being the manifestation, the supreme manifestation of God, that he considered himself as his humblest servant. He would never, in the ordinary time when everybody was out of the house, he would never give himself the liberty of suddenly walking into the room of Baha'u'llah. He would not go in without getting permission, without prostrating himself at his feet. You see, he had recognized him who he was. It wasn't his heavenly, it wasn't his earthly father. It was God revealed to man. He had recognized that. We haven't recognized it. And therefore he knew what humility meant towards his father. You have heard many stories of Abdu'l-Bahá approaching the house in which his father was living, for instance, in the mansion of Bahji. When Abdu'l-Bahá was in Akka and he was in the Bahji, you have heard of that story, I'm sure many of you. He used to ride his donkey to go from Akka to the mansion of Bahji. But as soon as he saw the mansion from distance, he would dismount from his donkey, because it is in the conventions of the East, and one of the signs of respect towards your Lord, if you are a servant of somebody, you never go riding to your servant. You must to your Lord. If you are a servant, you never ride to go to see your Lord. You always walk. And so Abdu'l-Bahá would dismount from his donkey as a respect towards, just as soon as he saw from 1 mile distance the mansion of Bahji, he would dismount. He would walk. He said he would never go riding. to his Lord. And then Baha'u'llah, what a love he had towards Abdu'l-Bahá. The outpouring of love and adoration that he had for him was something again out of this world. He often, when he would hear that Abdu'l-Bahá is coming to the mansion of Bahji, for example, as soon as he would hear, he would make the whole household and everyone who was around there to be vigilant to see when the master is arriving from distance, and he would send all the men who were there, every person, to go as a welcoming party a mile or two ahead. The master is coming, he said. And he himself would stand on the balcony watching, waiting for the master to come. And those who were with him, usually the female members of the household or some of the disciples who were there, women disciples and who were in that household, he would look to them and say, look at the master, look at the way he walks, look at his majesty, look at his powers, you see. Now this is a love relationship between the two, but one is the Lord and one is the servant. Now one, Baha'u'llah, you can consider him like a summit of a lofty mountain. And Abdu'l-Bahá, the lowest servant, the lowest valley, the lowest valley. No one can reach him as low as that, the lowest valley down there. And then when the water pours down from the top of the mountain, where does it accumulate? It accumulates in the lowest valley. And this is how Abdu'l-Bahá, you see, one of the distinguishing features of this revelation, and this you have all studied, the covenant, one of the distinguishing features of this revelation is that Baha'u'llah has brought his revelation for us. But unlike the prophets of the past, he never gave it to us. He brought it for us, but he didn't give it to us, his revelation. He gave them to Abdu'l-Bahá. This is the meaning of the covenant. All the forces of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, all the forces that he released for 40 years of his ministry, he poured it within the person of Abdu'l-Bahá. Abdu'l-Bahá became the reservoir of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. It's like this glass in here. This glass contains all the water that is therein. See? Abdu'l-Bahá became a container. Baha'u'llah had brought for us two things in this dispensation, and not more and not less. One was his revelation, and one was the person of Abdu'l-Bahá. And these two things is all that God has given to mankind in this age. And Abdu'l-Bahá became here like a container of the revelation of Baha'u'llah. And although he did not have the powers, although he was not a manifestation of God, he had the powers of the manifestation of God conferred upon him by virtue of containing all that revelation within him. And so what did Baha'u'llah tell us? He says to us this. This is his message. This is the gist of the covenant. He says, everything I have brought for you is with Abdu'l-Bahá. Go and get it from him. It is nowhere else. Outside Abdu'l-Bahá, nothing exists. It's within him. This is the meaning of the covenant. So you see, because he really received the revelation of Baha'u'llah on behalf of all humanity, and held it there and protected it, just like a wall that you put around an ocean. And it was an ocean of revelation. And that wall, many people tried to break through. The covenant breakers during his ministry. You should study that turbulent history of the faith during those 29 years. They tried to break through this great wall of this ocean and to get to this water of life. But Abdu'l-Bahá and a few of the believers who rallied around him like lions, they protected this covenant, this cause. And so they couldn't break through. And today, of course, it's a different story. That wall of the covenant is so strong that it will be foolish to think anybody can even think in terms of breaking through it. It's a tremendous revelation, really. And Abdu'l-Bahá and Baha'u'llah here have this reciprocal goal of one complementing the other, bringing to us the revelation of Baha'u'llah. Well, friends, I think we should take a break here, and then I will probably remember some of the things that I have forgotten. We will see.
Do you think we can start? You people must be exhausted, huh? Having been sitting here and listening. Well, where were we now? We were trying to understand something. Very little we can understand, remember, of the revelation of God. It's beyond us. We can get impressions of it, but not really to understand it fully. We were trying to understand something of the greatness of this revelation, and therefore appreciate the power of the words which are revealed to us in this day by Baha'u'llah. And we were talking about the revelation, how it came to him, how with such forcefulness, with such rapidity, the words were revealed in this age, that the world has been filled with the great ocean. It's like an ocean, really, of revelation. You know, Baha'u'llah has revealed, as I said, the words with such rapidity that within 1 hour 1,000 verses would have been revealed. To describe this for you and to show you the relationship of this revelation with the revelations of the past, we can look back and see the revelation of Islam, the revelation of the Quran. The Quran, which is the book of Islam, took 23 years to be revealed, and that is over 6,000 verses. Well, mankind needed only that. When the Bab appeared, his revelation was so much more profuse in pouring out his words that it took him 6 hours to reveal 1,000 verses. Now Baha'u'llah would reveal that in 1 hour. 6 times, almost 6 times faster than that of the Bab. It's very difficult to imagine what it is like to be placed in that time when revelation came to him. And when the revelation came to him, it was so powerful. The influence upon his own physical body was such that he says whenever revelation came to him, it was as if his body was put on fire. All the limbs of his body was put on fire. And this is why people could not fully look into his face at the time of revelation. They would be so overwhelmed if they did. There were so many people who tried to peep in the room where Baha'u'llah was revealing, and they could not stand it, and some of them fainted. Baha'u'llah would give permission to some of the followers, some of his disciples who begged to see the revelation, that he would allow them to come in. And they would come in and they would stand there for 1 or 2 minutes only, and then Baha'u'llah with a movement of his hand would dismiss them, which knew that they could not take it. And those people were so shaken during that experience. The experience was so much soul stirring that in one of his tablets Baha'u'llah says, if man was not weak, if God had not created man as a weak creature, we are weak creatures really, in one sense. If man was not weak, we would have allowed all people to come and witness the revelation of the Word of God. But they cannot stand it. You see? So, for 40 years, in this way, divine revelation had been pouring upon mankind. And as I said, it has drowned this world in an ocean of revelation. And yet we have only a portion of that revelation in writing. A portion of it.
because there were so many days and nights in the life of Baha'u'llah that he poured out from his lips the word of God, revealed so many things which were not recorded. When he was those years in the mountains of Kurdistan, all that was revealed was released into the air, into the open air, and that was all, for 2 years. And when Baha'u'llah came to Baghdad, Nabil mentions that for some years, every day and night, the equivalent of the Quran would have been revealed by Baha'u'llah within every 24 hours and not recorded. And even there came a time that Baha'u'llah ordered his secretary, at one stage in Baghdad, he was so disappointed from mankind and humanity and those people who were supposed to be his followers or followers of the Bab. He was so much distressed with their attitude and their condition that he asked his amanuensis, his secretary, to take a great portion of his writings, wash them and throw them into the river, saying mankind is not worthy of it in this age. So you see, it's a great, great ocean. And Abdu'l-Bahá has added to this yet further of his explanations and elucidations, and he has enriched the Baha'i, the writings of Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah has left behind about 15,000 tablets. And some of these tablets may be 1 page, some of them may be 100 pages, 50 pages. Abdu'l-Bahá has left behind something in the order of 26 or 27,000 tablets during the 29 years of his ministry. Again, the size of these tablets vary very much indeed. Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith, has left behind also something in the order of 26 or 27,000 letters, some of which were so lengthy that they merited to be published in the form of books. Such things as the advent of divine justice, the promised days come, these were letters of Shoghi Effendi, they were not books. The National Assembly of the United States decided to publish them and to give it a name and to put subtitles for it, as you've noticed. All these letters of the world order of Baha'u'llah which are included in that, each one of them is a letter. The only book that Shoghi Effendi wrote was God Passes By, which is a history of the 100 years of the faith. So you see how much information we have, how much guidance we have. You see, the world is full of it, and how all these writings have to be compiled and edited and indexed so that we can have access to it. Those of you who were there last night, I was mentioning how when I was a child I used to hear from the Baha'is in Persia that how can we go and teach the faith all over the world with donkeys, because they had never seen any other form of transportation, they could not visualize anything else. And the answer was that God will create the means for it. God will create the means. And now we can see the means here. I mean, you travel with the speed of sound now, or double the speed of sound. So you see, when the faith needs it, it will be created for it. This communication which has come into being is in order that the message of Baha'u'llah may reach to all mankind. Without it, the faith of Baha'u'llah would have been really meaningless. To have a religion which is for the whole world and yet not being able to communicate. And as days goes on, and as the needs of the faith are more and more apparent, then God will create the means for it. I have mentioned this maybe to some of you. You may have heard me saying this. I believe firmly that every time that the faith goes through different stages of growth, and it's growing constantly. And as you need the means, it will be given to us. Some 30 years ago, when I was in Dublin, I wanted to make a telephone call to Tehran. And it took me 2 days to arrange it. Because you have to find out, you have to see who you're going to speak in Tehran with. You couldn't have a direct communication with telephone. And that they would send a telegram to him, and he would come to the post office at a certain time, a certain hour, and we would go to the post office in our end at a certain time and a certain hour. And then by radio telephone, after 3 days of arrangement, we could speak together. Well, that was good enough. But today, the faith is moving with such force. The Baha'i world is becoming so active internationally. We have to be able to crisscross each other around the world. That you want to lift up your telephone at home and say to your friend, I'm coming, instead of today, I'm coming tomorrow. You have to be able to do it. And you see, the means are created for it. Always the means, as the faith grows, the means for its communications will grow with it. Otherwise we couldn't work. We could not have an international community if we did not have these simple facilities which we take it for granted. We couldn't. 30 years ago you could not have traveled from London to here. You may have traveled with great difficulties, probably. So many places and difficulties. 40 years ago certainly you couldn't. And there was no need for a person like me or somebody to come from England to here. There was no need for it. We did not have this universal relationship. There was a time that the faith was local in its functioning. When I was a young person, the faith has a local characteristic. Although we knew it was for the whole of mankind and the world, but our vision would not go beyond our local communities, because we were cut off from the rest of the world, from the rest of the country even. In our little village, for instance, if only a person would go once a year to the capital, it would be considered as one of the greatest acts he had done, to go to the capital. And when he came back, he would be considered as a very special man who had been to the capital. We did not have newsletters coming in every month like this. We did not have any of these things. The faith was really having a local characteristics. We used to teach in our town. We had the tablets of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Bahá and the writings of Shoghi Effendi. Whenever it came, it would reach us. Occasionally, every 6 months, maybe we would hear something from the Central Assembly in Tehran. So you see, the faith was local in character. Our visions was local. And then, it was like this until Shoghi Effendi really gave us the vision of national consciousness. And this happened in the 1940s. In America, it started in 1937 when the first 7-year plan came. And then in here, they acquired a consciousness that you shouldn't be concerned with your own town, but that you should be concerned with the whole country. But in the rest of the world, it was in 1940s. The Shoghi Effendi gave plans to various countries. And in those days, there were 7 or 8 national assemblies only. And to these 7 or 8 national assemblies in the 1940s, Shoghi Effendi gave them a plan to extend their teaching activities in other towns. And the idea occurred to us that we can and we should communicate with each other. And then the national communication was such that we could go from one town to another. We had then cars coming in, we could travel from place to place, from one town to another. And we acquired gradually, until 1953, we acquired the national consciousness. The faith rose up from a local level into a national level. In every country in the world, people began to act as one nation. You could see that. People pioneered from one end of the country to the other to form local spiritual assemblies. And so he rose up from that state of local into national. And it wasn't until Shoghi Effendi launched a 10-year crusade with which he brought the whole world together. And it didn't happen right away. It happened 10 years later. In 1963, when we had this Jubilee celebrations in London, in the Albert Hall in London, when we realized we became an international community, we acquired a consciousness of international consciousness. Then it was the whole world. Baha'is began to travel from one end of the world to the other. We used to send pioneers from one country to another country, one end of the world to the other. But in the 1940s, it wasn't even conceivable that somebody could pioneer, say, from Persia to England. It was impossible to even think about it. You wouldn't think in such terms. If you wanted to pioneer, you would only go to a town in your own country. So you see how we raised from local into national into international community. And as we rose in these conditions, the world facilities, the physical facilities, rose with it. When we became an international community, we needed to communicate with each other. on an international level, and gradually these facilities were created for us. You know, I was talking about the writings of Baha'u'llah. I was saying how vast it is. I was talking about the writings of Abdu'l-Bahá. I was saying how vast they are. And the same thing with Shoghi Effendi's. But do you realize that during the lifetime of Shoghi Effendi, who was the guardian of the faith, none of these writings were indexed. None of them. None of them was in a form that you could try and say, I want on such and such a subject, what Baha'u'llah has said about this, that you could find it. All this great many writings, it was not indexed. And Shoghi Effendi did not need it to be indexed. He was divinely guided. You asked him a question, and he would reply to you. He would say, this means this, and that means this, and you should do this, you should do that. But when the House of Justice came into being, in 1963, it was a different story. The House of Justice realized that they could not work, they could not give guidance unless they knew what Baha'u'llah had said on that subject, what Abdu'l-Bahá had said about that subject, what Shoghi Effendi had said about that subject. But how were they going to find it? With all these writings of Baha'u'llah, which is an ocean, I described to you the immensity of the writings. How can they pass a resolution without looking at the writings? They couldn't. And so, the first thing they did was to have this research department established. And in this research department, the first thing they did, they began to index the writings of Shoghi Effendi. Or how they did it. I remember looking at the way they were working in those days, 1963. They would read a letter of Shoghi Effendi and they would see in one page there are 5 questions, 5 different subjects. Well, the ideal thing was to take 5 copies and put each one in a file. That's what you would do. Each one a different subject. Now, do you realize that perhaps you may be surprised to hear this, but something very simple nowadays we have, and it's called a photocopier. Well, that machine became available commercially just at the time that the House of Justice came into being. Before that, it didn't exist. And if we didn't have that simple, straightforward machine, how would you be able to copy 26,000 letters, each page 5 times? You know, put it in their files. Impossible. It came just in time. It didn't come at the time of Shoghi Effendi. We didn't need it. But as we needed it, it came into being. And I remember when they were making these indexes, someone told me this. He said, we have got now 500 subjects on a master index. They're card indexes. 500 subjects. How can you remember them? How can you know which is which? You will forget it tomorrow, what you have written on the first page. The mind could not conceive it, could not take it. And then came the computer. It took over. And now you go and ask them, you go and ask a question. I want to know what Shoghi Effendi has said about that subject, what Baha'u'llah has said about that subject. You just ask them, and this is what the House of Justice does. As soon as you ask a question from the House of Justice, they will ask their research department to see what Shoghi Effendi has said about it, if any. What Abdu'l-Bahá has said about it, if any. And with the press of a button, you get the answers where to look for them. And it is copied, put in front of the members of the House of Justice. They know now what is involved. Do you see how, as the faith needs it, things will come for us? Now, how can you imagine the House of Justice could have worked in any other way? How could they give guidance in an ocean of writings without these facilities? But these facilities were not here at the time of Abdu'l-Bahá. These facilities were not here at the time of Shoghi Effendi. They came into being just in time. And I can assure you that as time goes on, and as the speed of the growth of the faith increases, and when great numbers come into the faith, and we are going to be faced with complexities of administration, which we now cannot even imagine how we're going to handle it, facilities will be created for us. The world, all these things will be solved. God will create the means. I told you this yesterday. This is what I remember when I heard this when I was 8 years of age. When the believers could not imagine they can travel throughout the world on donkeys. And they had never seen a bicycle even. They couldn't visualize any form of transportation. And they were asking, how can we go? And the answer was, this is the cause of God. It will create the means for